Hey, good morning. It's Monday, January 13th. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 465 days old. I'm your host today, Mark Montgomery, Senior Director of FDD's Center on Cyber and Technology Innovation, filling in for Jonathan Schanzer. Welcome back to the FDD Morning Brief. Today's guest is a fellow Navy man, Commander Isaac Ike Harris, a retired U.S. Navy ship commander with over 2 decades of service under his belt. I'm proud to say that he also serves as an adjunct fellow here at FDD's Center on Cyber and Technology Innovation. Additionally, Ike formerly advised the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, focusing on critical issues such as China, technology competition, foreign investment in the U.S., export controls, and innovation. He was also recently the Vice President of Government Strategy at Exeger, where he led the company's efforts to integrate cutting-edge supply chain risk management technology for U.S. government clients. Ike's wealth of experience and strategic insight in both defense and technology make him a powerful voice in today's conversation. So stay tuned for that conversation in just a few minutes. Today, I want to talk about deterrence. Deterrence is failing in the Red Sea, despite an aggressive and expensive defensive effort by the United States Navy to defeat the Houthi threat to international shipping. The lack of a parallel deterrence by cost imposition or punishment is weakening U.S. policy effectiveness. So just to understand it, deterrence is widely understood to consist of 3 broad elements. First, deterrence by denial, making an adversary's actions less effective. Second, deterrence by cost imposition or punishment, holding an enemy accountable for its actions. And third, deterrence by entanglement, working with international organizations and using other non-military tools to prevent conflict. The U.S. is trying to deter the Houthis by denial, either by shooting down nearly 200 cruise and ballistic missiles and drones that target both the merchant ships transiting the Red Sea, as well as targeting the U.S. and Navy the U.S. and its partners' Navy ships defending those international shipping lanes. The U.S. Navy and the U.S. Air Force, and sometimes the Israeli Air Force, are also practicing deterrence by denial when they strike Houthi missile command and control and logistics sites in Yemen. The problem, of course, is that the entity the U.S. needs to deter to stop the Houthi attacks is Iran, not the Houthis themselves. To deter Tehran, the U.S. will actually have to impose costs on the Islamic Republic. And that can only be done by politically riskier but necessary strikes against Iran. These strikes should include the Iranian missile fabrication facilities, the port facilities, the ships and dhows that transship Iranian supplies and weapons to Yemen and eventually to the Houthis. And then this should also include actions to sink or seize any Iranian ships suspected of supporting the Houthis with targeting information. Look, Iran is happy to fight the U.S. and Israel to the very last Houthi. The U.S. needs to hold Iran accountable, and they need to do it now. Now for the headlines this morning. Headline 1, Iran reportedly conducted air defense drills over the weekend. According to Iranian state media, the drills are part of a series of war games that Tehran kicked off in early January. Might have wanted to kick those off last October. But Iranian media described Saturday's exercise as practice defending Iranian airspace and sensitive sites against potential air, missile, and electronic warfare threats. The regime's wargaming will reportedly last for 2 months. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has already practiced defending key nuclear sites against mock missile and drone attacks. 24 hours before this weekend's drill, Tehran released a video showing IRGC Commander Hossein Salami visiting an underground missile city with tunnels large enough for trucks to drive through. Salami boasted of Iran's growing missile power and warned the regime's enemies against relishing in a false sense of delight over its setbacks in the region. All of this posturing is taking place as Iran anticipates Donald Trump's second term, the return of a maximum pressure campaign, and the possibility that the Trump administration might even greenlight an Israeli attack on Iranian nuclear sites. Headline 2, speaking of maximum pressure, Iran has shipped approximately 3 million barrels of oil from its storage site in China. What's this have to do with the maximum pressure campaign? Well, Tehran originally sent the oil to China way back in 2018, expecting the Trump administration to impose sanctions that would prevent the regime from exporting oil. At the time, Tehran shipped some 25 million barrels of oil to China. Today, the sales value of that entire stockpile is well north of $2 billion. So the oil's been sitting at these two Chinese ports for 7 years, one east of Beijing and the other south of Shanghai. Tehran has been leasing tanks from a Chinese operator, racking up hundreds of millions of dollars in storage fees since 2018. The regime has sought to sell some oil before, but Beijing has not previously okayed a drawdown. That changed after Donald Trump's reelection. Last week, a ship reportedly set sail from China with some 2 million barrels aboard. A second vessel is loaded with 700,000 barrels. It's still supposedly docked in China. Headline 3. Israel may release 3,000 Palestinian prisoners in exchange for the 98 hostages left in Gaza. A Palestinian source told media that during the first phase of a future ceasefire, Israel will release 200 terrorists serving life sentences, plus 48 others who were released in 2012 in exchange for Israeli Defense Force soldier Gilad Shalit, who have since been rearrested for terrorist activity. Additionally, approximately 1,000 Palestinian prisoners are expected to be released during the first phase of the deal. In return, Hamas is expected to free 25 hostages in the first phase. So more than 1,000 terrorists in exchange for 1/4 of the hostages left in Gaza. That's a pretty staggering ratio. Many of the released prisoners will return to their homes, while the most serious offenders will reportedly be deported to Qatar, Turkey, or Egypt. All right, now it's finally time for that interview with Commander Ike Harris. From his 2-decade stint as an officer in the U.S. Navy to his most recent position as the Vice President of Government Strategy at Exeter, Ike has a robust knowledge of the defense industrial base, the role technology plays, how ships operate at sea, and a lot more. So let's dive in. Welcome to the program, Ike. All right, Ike, you've commanded an Aegis destroyer, like all those ships that are in the Red Sea right now. As I remember, the USS Ramage was your ship. What's your impression of the work the U.S. Navy ships have done over the past 15 months confronting hundreds of cruise and ballistic missile launches and drones? And why is the Navy able to operate a missile defense system at sea with such a high level of efficiency?
Yeah, so one, thanks for having me. It's great to be here and talk to you, Mark. I think, one of the things that the Navy never really learned was when you do something very hard, don't make it look easy. So they have done something really amazing in the Red Sea over the last 18 months. We entered a new age of warfare with the Houthis, right? So up until that point, there had never been anti-ship missile used in combat. We had never seen, really since the tanker wars or since really the Falklands, the extensive use of anti-ship cruise missiles at war against sophisticated air defense systems. When I was, I'm sure just like you, when I was learning air defense in the Navy, most of it surrounded the Falklands and some of those tanker wars, and that was a very challenging environment. Our systems have come, exponentially farther in that time. The other piece I'll throw in there is that our systems are designed to operate at sea in open waters. The Bab el-Mandeb and the area around the Red Sea and that whole region are extremely challenging to operate from a technical perspective, just because the confines of the battle space and the fact you're to operate, the radars don't operate really well over land and mountain areas. So having to do that, and frankly, we've been doing it for 20 or 30 years now, so we've got a lot of experience. But the Navy has shown its ability that it can operate, it can adapt, constantly is having to deal with new threats, and that our stuff works, and it works really, really well and consistently. Now, quantity aside, we have shown that to the world that when the United States Navy goes to war, it's very effective.
Yeah, thanks. You remind me, my son's on one of these destroyers, and so I stay reasonably up to speed on the technology, and I am amazed at the high efficiency rate of these engagements. They've been using the more expensive missiles, which I think they've tried to reduce, the $3-4 million missiles, reduce it down to the cheaper missiles. We've accidentally, I think, had to use some gun systems on occasion. We prefer not to do that for close-in shots. How do you think the Navy, how are they able to get the systems iteratively so much smarter?
So one of the great things we have, with our global presence, right, is the ability to communicate in real time with the centers of excellence back in the United States, right? So Dahlgren is the the kind of Aegis center of excellence. So when those ships are taking shots, when they're engaging, Dahlgren has the tapes of those engagements within hours, and they can do a lot of iteration and understanding what technical parameters the system used or didn't use, or how could it have been better, and refine that, and then push tactics back out to the ships themselves at sea. I mean, the fact that we can do that now, we're so good at it. I mean, we really have an ability to fine tune. Hey, we see this new threat. We see the kinematics, the direction, the profiles, all those things. This is the way we engaged it. We think we could have done a little bit better here or there. You have multiple ships doing these engagements. They're doing it in different fashions based on the way that they're seeing the threat. Those things can be compared and contrasted against one another. So, I mean, we really have an ability to share very, very technical data of our systems across both ships back to our centers of excellence and push that information back out very quickly. And I think it's, obviously it's shown how effective it can be with an adapting threat, a totally novel adapting threat in real time here for the last 18 months.
Yeah, thanks. And, it's been successful, but despite all these successes, defensively, it does not appear that the defensive actions or even the actions of the U.S. Navy or U.S. Air Force or Israeli Air Force attacking Houthi targets all over Yemen, it doesn't appear that it's stopping the threat. Why is this? Why is this the case?
Yeah, I agree, and I think this sort of gets beyond the Navy's remit and kind of goes into policy, right? You mentioned deterrence at the beginning in your monologue, and I think what we have here is we have a failure of deterrence. Essentially, we've shown that we are, for our own reasons, unwilling to go as hard against the Houthi threat as perhaps we could have. Certainly, I think, and comparing this to what the Israelis did in Gaza, I mean, sort of, there are a lot of very complicated issues around the Gaza operation on the Israeli side, and certainly that's been debated in FDD for a long time. But the one thing, in a military perspective, the one thing that the Israelis did was they restored deterrence, right? They showed that Hamas that if you're going to do this, that we're going to up our level of warfare to ensure that we no longer have this threat. And they did that. I mean, obviously there's a lot of other ramifications of that, but from a purely military perspective, they showed that they've restored deterrence. I think we've failed to do that in some way. I mean, for the same reasons that is a challenge for Israel. I believe, from what I've heard anecdotally since I've been out, that we're limiting our strikes on the Houthis to basically an in progress attack. We're in preparation for it, so we're not going as hard. I mean, we have a little more in the last maybe month or so, but we're not looking farther left on the kill chain to say, hey, these are garrison forces, these are production facilities. I think the Israelis had a power plant last week. But that's really where you say, like, look, if you're going to do this, we're going to take extreme measures on all of your military capability to make sure you can't threaten us again. And I think, frankly, it's been a little surprising to me, because these aren't guys shooting at other things and we're there defending them. We're being directly engaged, purposefully and deliberately. So that, to me, is a point where the U.S. military needs to make has a decision point to say, look, if you're gonna go after us, we're gonna respond. We're gonna respond asymmetrically.
Thanks. And I'd extend your analogy and say the Israelis reestablished deterrence with Hezbollah, and they definitely did it with Iran with their most recent strikes. To hold Iran accountable for its actions against Israel in multiple fronts. And let me follow up and say, let's say the new Trump administration follows your advice or follows what probably both of us think, which is, and conducts these kind of strikes. Is it risky for U.S. forces to conduct these sorts of strikes against Iran?
18 months ago, I would have probably said yes. My experience, my last deployment there in 19 and 20 was in the Persian Gulf, and I was intimately familiar with the threat and what the Iranians had on paper. Let's say, I will say that through direct kinetic operations, the United States and its allies, including Israel, have shown that is not nearly as capable as we once thought it was. Again, going back to the fact our stuff works, and it works really, really well, and it works a whole lot better than Chinese or Russian stuff, right? So I don't think that given the proper force package, I really don't think that there would be a direct risk to force. I think there is risk to escalation in the region. Certainly, Hezbollah, and we've seen this previously, that they have a global footprint. So, the escalation dynamic would be not just, hey, what's the military to military response, but what's the global response to from Iranian proxies that now escalate horizontally.
Although it could be argued that strikes against Iran at this point would only be proportional because of the many strikes they've facilitated the Houthis doing against Jewish ships. And I think out of respect for my wife, a former Navy pilot, I have to say every time a plane takes off, a military aircraft, there's a risk to the force of being lost. But I agree with you. Taking strikes on Iranian ports, munitions factories, things like that should not, significantly increase the risk to the pilots because of the quality of both our systems and our munitions. All right. So what else can we do? What can the U.S. do to pressure Iran over the support for the Houthis outside of like the traditional military tools?
Well, I think you brought up the oil that they've sold the Chinese, and we heard reports. FDD had a piece on this last week or the week before about the Chinese directly engaging with the Houthis to arm them to in exchange for safe passage. I mean, we have seen an alignment of Iran, China, and Russia and North Korea in a way that is new to the strategic environment, and really, I would say surprisingly so. How obvious it has been on the Chinese side, because it's clear that they also have lost a little bit of a deterrent factor there because they're doing these things fairly openly. I mean, it doesn't you don't have to have any classified information to look at the Chinese ships that are passing through on maritime surface trackers and seeing that none of them get attacked, right? That just becomes glaringly obvious if you look at it. That combined with the Iranian support in drone facilities to the Russian campaign in Ukraine. I saw a statistic the other day that something like 70% of the banned products going into Russia, sanctioned products going to Russia, are not coming from China. And so there's an exceptionally high degree of coordination and cooperation between these four countries, working directly against the U.S., but certainly even peaceful interests in the world, with an attempt to destabilize at least two, if not maybe three regions here in the near future.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad you mentioned oil. I think for both Russia and Iran, maximum pressure campaigns, the key is going to be sanctioning the shadow fleets that move their oil around by sanctioning the secondary and tertiary providers, those companies and countries and banks that facilitate follow-on transfers. And I think we're at that point. And you're right. China is going to be a key part of that. And you did mention the axis of aggressors, those four countries: Iran, North Korea, Russia, and China. You and I spent some time in Ukraine a few months ago. We were training Ukrainian forces in operational planning. How is Iran supporting Russia, its partner in this axis of authoritarians?
One of the things that again, going back to this on paper military, like we've seen that the Russian military wasn't nearly as capable as we thought it was, and they've burned through a lot of equipment in a fairly ham-fisted, at least initially, way of using their own stuff, right? So they've had to go to other sources to develop the capability to field an army, right? There was a good piece in the New York Times this week about how the Ukrainians, using commercial drones and just explosives off of other projectiles, have changed warfare, right? When we saw this when we were there, the use of FPV, first person video drones on the battlefield is literally it is a new era of warfare, right? And if we're not, if any country is not rapidly adapting to that, they're going to be behind in the next war, right? And the Russians have done that as well. I think they're obviously, the Ukrainians are, I think, farther along and better equipped to do that. But the Russians have leaned very heavily on the Iranians and their drone capacity for the Mahajers, some of the other Shahed drones. I mean, this is something that the Iranians have been doing for a long time in the Gulf. When I was there, we would regularly get overflown by some of their ISR drones. It's just something we've lived with for a good at least 10 years, and they're sharing a lot of that lessons learned, that production capacity with the Russians now, and making sure that they can continue to fight.
You're right. That production capacity, you and I saw it on 3 or 4 of the nights in the city we were in. There were drone attacks. If anything, it's increased in the 2 or 3 months since we left. So Shahed production in Russian facilities is certainly part of the enabling tools for Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. Hey, Ike, I want to thank you very much. Thank you for your service to the nation. Thank you for volunteering to be an adjunct fellow at FDD. And thank you for joining us today on the Morning Brief.
It was great talking to you.
All right. Jump that one a little bit. Here's what FDD has on tap for you today. Be sure to tune in to FDD's virtual event today at 10 a.m. Eastern on tunnels as a weapon of war, how they're being used by Hamas and Hezbollah in Gaza and Lebanon, and how the necessary responses from Israel, the United States, and other allies to the threat. My colleague Brad Bowman will moderate the panel of experts featuring Jon Schanzer, Daphne Richmond-Barak, and our own Jonathan Conricus. A recording will also be made available on FDD's YouTube channel and website. Our Chief Executive Officer, Mark Dubowitz, and the head of the FDD's Center on Economic and Financial Power, Elaine Dzerzhinsky, have a great new piece in the Wall Street Journal exploring the ways in which South Africa is increasingly becoming more of a liability than an asset to the United States. They advocate that the incoming Trump administration needs to take a close look at what we should be demanding from Pretoria, namely to stop enabling China, Russia, and Iran. And finally, my colleague Hussein Abdul Hussein's latest op-ed in the Times of Israel offers an analysis on Lebanon's future after the election of its new president, Lebanese Armed Forces Commander Joseph Aoun. Hussein discusses Aoun's pledge to disarm Hezbollah and his potential shift towards diplomacy with Israel rather than violence. Hussein wisely still cautions that despite Lebanon's promising direction, Hezbollah is still just one day away from regaining dominance. Only time will tell. All right, that's a wrap for today. If you're looking for more analysis on a variety of topics related to foreign policy and national security, just check out our website at fdd.org. Make sure to also read our quick takes on X at FDD. Check out our Instagram and YouTube channels. Found out I had a YouTube channel today there. And consider making a tax-deductible donation at fdd.org/invest. Tune in Wednesday for another episode of the FDD Morning Brief. Another guest host, FDD's research analysis, Mariam Waba, will be filling in for Jon again, who is currently in Israel. Her guest will be Sam Tadros, a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, who, like Mariam, is well-versed on all issues related to Egypt. Be sure to check out that episode. Thanks for tuning in. I look forward to hosting again soon. I'm Mark Montgomery, signing off for FDD.